Okay, it's 10:02, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining the webinar today. We're Alloy, and you can find us at alloy.digital. And this is a webinar about behavioral economics and digital transformation, as you know. My name is Matt McKenzie. I'm the president of Alloy. I've pretty much been a technologist my whole life, but particularly in my career. Started off doing systems administration work, was a systems engineer, did software development, did project management, and then product management, and then took on marketing and sales roles. I have a degree in economics from Vanderbilt University, and I'm really passionate about behavioral economics.
And I am Lindsay Seal. I'm an account director here at Alloy, and I've got about 15 years in account and partner management between marketing agencies and high growth tech startups. I've had a variety of clients from donuts and delivery to metal buildings and manufacturing, and I really enjoy consumer brands that are coupled with advanced technology that make my life easier because I'm a working mother with 2 rowdy boys.
And again, we are Alloy Digital. And if you're not familiar with Alloy, of course, we do digital transformation consulting. We also do digital strategy and consulting. And along those lines, I do a lot of user and consumer research and analysis. We also do web design and development and UX UI type work. And we're very proficient in mobile application development. We've launched dozens of applications. And in general, if you can think of it, we can build it. And so we're great at custom software development. We build a lot of back-end systems, business process management systems. We manage data and do data communication work. And we also do things like cloud integrations. And again, you can find us at alloy.digital. So obviously we're all here to learn about behavioral economics and discuss its impact and discuss how it integrates in with digital transformation. But I just wanted to start off with sort of a baseline of what behavioral economics is. You may be familiar with this graph. It's one of the first graphs I saw in my economics classes. And if you're not familiar with it, it's basically the supply and demand chart. And the concept here is that people are very rational. So when the price goes up, people are going to buy less and vice versa. And while that makes sense mathematically, it doesn't really make sense in the real world because people are not rational decision makers. Innately, we know the opposite is actually true, that people do not make decisions rationally. They make decisions on instinct and emotion. We have to go back to understand to Charles Darwin and the theory of evolution. People were forced to be able to make decisions based upon those innate feelings and those innate emotions in order to be able to respond and adapt to their environments. And because of that, people actually were learned and were trained in their brain to actually utilize that sort of innate system of being responsive to those decision-making activities. And so it really explains why humans actually make decisions utilizing instinct 98% of the time in decisions that we make. In context, we know with COVID, there's a lot of things happening that don't really make sense, like panic buying as an example, or people that already know that even though the virus is increasing, things like social distancing measures are not being abided by. And in fact, I've actually got an article up on LinkedIn that I pushed out this week. If you have further interest in what's happening with behavioral economics and COVID, you can take a look at that there. But I'd like to use a study. It's one of my favorite studies to really bring home what behavioral economics means and how it impacts people and how people are really irrational in the way that they think. And in the study, what they did was present people with different options of jam to buy. And what they found was the more options they presented to people to buy a jam, the less likely they were to buy it. Logically, we think the more options that people have to buy something, the more likely they are to buy it. But what happened is when they presented people with the optimal number 6 flavors of jam, they were significantly more likely to buy the jam than if we presented additional options. And so the reason there is by presenting a lot of additional options for buying jam, we cause the consumers to think too much, and people tend to not want to think a whole lot. And so they want to be presented with options that are making their decision making easy. And I think this is a really good example of how, even though it's rational to think that people might buy more jam if there are more options, in reality, people are actually driven by their intuition, which is to buy more when less options are actually available to them. And so really, behavioral economics is one part economics and one part psychology. And in fact, it's the science of psychology as it relates to economic decision making. But we're all here today to really understand more specifically about how behavioral economics impacts digital experiences. But first, these are four of my behavioral economics heroes. All these people have a number of interesting things in common. One is that none of them were trained to be behavioral economists. In fact, behavioral economics is a relatively new science and has only really been picking up steam in the last like 10 or 15 years. Another thing that's interesting about all these individuals is they all won a Nobel Prize. And what's cool about that is that behavioral economics has had such a big impact in the way that we think about humans and how they respond to stimulus and inputs has really been groundbreaking. And it's something that we could look to leverage in our marketing and particularly in our digital and technology experiences. However, none of these behavioral economists really focus on digital and technology exclusively. While they do talk about it, it's just not a focus of their work. However, there is one person that has really focused on behavioral economics throughout his career. He started back in 1980, and his name is B.J. Fogg. He's currently the research associate and professor at Stanford University. He created the Persuasive Design Laboratory, which later was renamed to Behavior Design Laboratory. He coined the term captology, which is the study of computers and their persuasiveness and how to make computers persuasive. And one of the things that was interesting about B.J. Fogg is in 2007, he started a 10-week course to train students about how to implement behavioral economics in Facebook applications. And this is back in the time when Facebook apps were all the rage. And the cool thing about what they did was they created these applications that were very simple in nature, but really tugged on people's emotions and heartstrings in order to get them to take action and bring other people into the experience. And what ended up happening was millions of users actually ended up utilizing these apps. And in fact, New York Times called it, this particular course, the class that built apps and fortunes, because all the students ended up becoming not necessarily wealthy, but they all made a lot of money from these apps to the tune of like $1 million. And while I never had a college course like that, I certainly could have used one to help, refund my beer supply. I didn't really have a whole lot of money to spend on that in college, but if only I had B.J. Fogg at the time. But one of the things that he has done since then is he's started the Behavior Design Boot Camp. And what's really interesting about this boot camp is that the who's who's of Silicon Valley have attended this boot camp. And that's the reason why his disciples currently walk the hallways of places like Amazon and Google and Uber and a lot of these large technology companies. And all the apps that we're used to utilizing leverage some of these concepts as part of the experiences, which is why these apps have become such a big part of our life. Now, at times, B.J. Fogg has been the subject of a bit of criticism, and people have really said that he basically has trained Silicon Valley and other technology types to basically make apps addictive. And, just kind of going back to the Facebook apps, I can tell you at the time when they were so popular, I was addicted to Farmville. Because Farmville had all of these behavioral economic techniques that kept pulling me back into the application. I spent innumerable hours probably wasting a lot of time and probably should have been focusing on more important things like work instead, but so be it. They do work and they have a big impact. One of the things that B.J. Fogg did that really helped quite a bit in learning how to implement behavioral economics concepts into technology was to create the Fogg behavioral model. And what's cool about it is actually really simplifies behavior and desired behavior and how to achieve it. And so this, as you can see from this graph, there's two primary axes. One is motivation and one is ability. And the concept is when motivation is really high with someone, you can get them to do just about anything, even if it's very, very hard to do. However, if motivation is low, it's very difficult to get anyone to do anything, even if it's really easy to do. And so the concept is if you're looking for people to achieve the desired behavior, which is what it's called, that's the target that you're looking for, then you have to be able to have the right combination of motivation with ability, but you also have to prompt them to take action. And this is actually something that takes advantage of a principle in behavioral economics called status quo bias. And basically the concept is people are always going to keep with the status quo, even if they know they should move away from it, or they're more likely to stay with the status quo when they're aware they should move away from it without being prompted to do so. And so people naturally need that prompt. So again, in order to achieve the desired behavior, you have to have the right motivation and the right ability with the right prompt at the same time. But what's cool about this model is it helps us break down each desired behavior into 3 very simple questions. Number 1, is someone motivated enough? Do they have the motivation to then perform the desired action? And number 2, does someone have the ability to perform the desired action? i.e., is it easy enough to perform that desired action? And then lastly, but just as important, have we prompted them, or did we prompt them to perform the desired behavior? And if you have all of those 3 working very well in conjunction, then you're going to be able to influence people and get them to take the desired behavior that you're looking for in any type of decision making, but absolutely in digital and technology experiences. So to kind of bring that home, I wanted to present an example of someone who was looking to quit smoking. And I'm sure that we all know someone, and hopefully not too many of us, but we all know someone who's tried to quit smoking or convince someone to quit smoking. And some of the things we know about quitting smoking is it's actually really hard to do. And we also all know that in order to get someone to quit smoking, they have to have really high motivation to do so. They have to really want to quit smoking. If they don't want to quit smoking, it's just too hard to do to make it happen on your own. And that's the other thing, is that it's so hard to do that even when you have high motivation, in many cases you can't quit smoking because it's just a really hard thing to do even when you really want to. So in this scenario, how can we solve for that? I'd like to use an example from GoodRx for how they were able to take advantage of the scenario in order to get people to take action, and not only buy their product, but also help people achieve their desired behavior, which is to quit smoking. And the way they were able to do that is in the environment where you have a really high motivation, you got to make it easy for people to do. Again, you got to increase their ability, or otherwise known as making it easy. And the way that they did that in this scenario was send out advertisements to people in places like, Pandora. So you can see this mobile device in the middle of the slide here, where there's an advertisement to quit smoking. So the advertisement itself already kind of targets people who have a high level of motivation. You want to quit smoking. Therefore, if you have the willingness to click on this advertisement, then we're going to drive you to experience. But we know if you come to this experience, you probably have a high level of motivation. But we wanted to make it easier for you to quit smoking. Quitting smoking is a very hard thing to do. But we know that if you buy Chantix, Chantix is very effective at making people quit smoking, or at least it helps make it easier for people to quit smoking. So if you want to start your smoke-free journey today, then click here to get started. And so that's actually the prompt or the trigger to help people achieve the desired behavior. In this case, desired behavior applies both ways. It's the desired behavior for the business. They want you to buy Chantix, but also for the end user, the desired behaviors to quit smoking. But that's not always enough for people, as there are different people with different levels of motivation, and different people, for whatever reason, have different levels of ability. And so they presented some other behavioral economics related concepts to try to get people to take action and respond to that prompt. Number 1 is they told people they could get treated online. We all know that, going to the doctors is kind of a pain. You got to make the appointment. You got to keep the appointment. You got to make time out of your schedule. You've got to go get in the car and physically go to the appointment. You've got to go into the doctor's office. And in today's world, there aren't too many people that want to go into the doctor's office anyway, right, because of COVID. But allowing people to get treated online kind of removes all those barriers and really helps increase people's ability to buy Chantix. So that was a really important piece that they added on to this that helps people respond to the prompt and makes it comfortable for them to respond to that prompt to take action. The second thing they did was support same-day prescriptions. And this actually takes advantage of a couple of concepts. One's called present bias, and the other one's called time discounting. And the concept there is that given nothing else, people tend to want to stay with the current, but they value things that happen quicker versus things that happen later, which is why we have this society of people who want immediate gratification response to things that kind of goes to this time discounting concept. And so the way that they took advantage of it in this scenario was to be able to make it very easy to get your prescription. So not only can you get it the same day from your local pharmacy, but they'll even mail it to you, which removes another physical barrier for you to take action. So again, they're making me more and more comfortable to buy Chantix to quit smoking. And then lastly, what they did was offer satisfaction guarantee. And this actually takes advantage of a couple of different other behavioral economics concepts. One is procrastination bias, which is Typically, it's kind of like if people don't really have that high level of, if they're not prompted, but they also don't have a reason to stop doing what they're doing today, they typically kind of push it off till later on. And the other part of that that works in conjunction with that is what's called imperfect information. And imperfect information is when people kind of view their current self with their future self, and they compare those two, and they feel like their future self could be at risk for any reason. In this case, maybe Chantix doesn't work for me for whatever reason, or maybe I don't like Chantix, or I've heard bad things about it, then maybe I'm not really that excited about moving forward. But by offering the satisfaction guarantee, you correct that imperfect information balance for people and make them feel comfortable with what the state of their future self is going to feel like. So these three things kind of work together to decrease the ability. They do have some effect on the motivation as well, but they're coming along at the same time as the prompt to buy Chantix to quit smoking. So you can see how all these things kind of work in concert to influence people's behavior and take advantage of their high level of motivation of quitting smoking.
Now that you've learned all about behavioral economics, there will be a short quiz. No, I'm kidding. We won't quiz you, but there are innumerable aspects and applications to behavioral economics, and it would take hours to get through. We even considered adding like a third hour, kind of like the Today Show does. But unlike the Today Show's third hour, we're going to keep things interesting and relevant here in our only 1 hour webinar. So here are a few examples of brands that are using behavioral economics. This time, these were led with technology and digital efforts. So in Amazon's early days, I'm sure you're all familiar with Amazon, you did your shopping and then you were required to register. So you put in some details about yourself, you created an account, and then again, you were prompted to register. If you were brave enough to committing to the register, the next time around, you inevitably forgot your password. Amazon saw a huge drop off because of this. People mainly not following through with their order because of the commitment. But then if they did, again, they just completely forgot their password. So they got a lot of forgot password prompts and emails, and we're seeing that people just didn't complete the order. So a masterful product designer said, let's try continue and make it a little bit easier to process these orders. So the concept of ability intervention comes to play here because the conceived notion that continue was in fact an easier path. So they were granting people an easier ability to place their order on Amazon. Amazon now, looking back, attributes this small change to sales growth to the tune of $300 million over the next year, simply because of that button. Now let's take a quick rewind and back to around 2002, when I'm sure nobody got in a car with a stranger. And fast forward to present day, we now summon vehicles with a simple app that we can pay through and tip through, and we now have Uber and Lyft to take us places. Again, let's rewind a bit, go back to when you didn't want to meet people on the internet. I remember in middle school, my mom telling me, not to talk to strangers on Instant Messenger. And now we have apps like Bumble and Tinder where we are connecting with people to hopefully meet up and spark a love connection. So times have definitely changed, and all of these examples are using behavioral economics to drive action and conversion.
One of the things that I forgot to mention earlier that I did want to let everyone know is we're going to have the opportunity to answer a few questions at the end of the webinar. So if you do have a question, there's a question and answer feature inside of your Zoom. So move your mouse around or whatever and take a look at that and submit your question there. And we'll just moderate some of the questions, and then we'll try to get to as many as we can today. So I forgot to mention that earlier. I want to make sure that everyone realized we had an opportunity to answer questions. If for whatever reason we can't get to your question today, I would love to answer each one of them individually, and I'll do so. And so there'll be my email address as well as Lindsay's email address at the end of this webinar. Feel free to email us, either one of us, and we'll make sure to get your question answered. So one of the things that everyone is really here today to understand is not only about behavioral economics, but how does it really fit into digital transformation? We all know that every single company out there is in some phase of digital transformation, even if they're at the very beginning. And the reason why they are is because it's literally the race against digital Darwinism. So when people are providing enough really rich digital customer experiences or aren't doing things to try to innovate from a digital perspective, they're going to lose market share and hopefully not, but maybe even go out of business. And that's only becoming more accelerated and changed, which I'll talk about in a moment. But it's something that's critical, for every organization, but it's not all about technology. And I think that's the fallacy of when people start thinking about digital transformation, they think of it as a technology solution. A lot of times they task their CTO or the technology department is like, you guys have to lead this effort. You got to figure out how to build more technical tools, but they forget one of the critical parts of what makes this impactful, and that's the end user and the holistic customer experience. In fact, the holistic customer experience is by far the primary focus of digital transformation. And that's because it's gotta be human-centered. And you'll see a common theme about everything that we talk about at Alloy and everything that we talk about in this webinar is we have to put the end user, the end customer, the people at the center of everything we do, understanding what they want, what their needs and desires are, and then try to be very responsive to that. And that's where behavioral economics also has a huge impact, is because by focusing on the end user, we can bring behavioral economics concepts into these new digital experiences to really transform the way that people are thinking about our brand, the way that the people are thinking about our products and how they're being responsive. That also applies as well to some of the internal applications you may have for your employees. You can influence the employees in the same way that you'd look to influence your customers. So it's not just about consumer focus. It also can be very much about B2B, as well as even internal employee application experiences, which are also part of that digital transformation concept. One of the interesting things about technology and humans, though, is the technology rate for growth is exponential. Moore's law states that technology actually doubles about every 2 years, and you've seen that since pretty much the beginning of time as they've been tracking it, and they've been tracking it at MIT from a technology perspective since the late 60s. And this is pretty much a truism in today's world that it's rapidly expanding and growing. We're all experiencing that to some degree. However, the human adaptation historically to technology has been linear in nature. And that's that blue line that you're seeing across the screen there until you get to 2020, which is flame being added to that fire, which is the coronavirus accelerant. All the trends that we'll talk about today and that you're probably already aware of that are happening with coronavirus are really forcing companies to be responsive. So what we're seeing is companies are already adapted to the need to be responsive to customers, to have a holistic customer experience, to create great digital experiences, to be able to adapt those very quickly, are able to take advantage of the changes that coronavirus has provided them from that accelerant concept, whereas other companies are really working very hard to keep up. And one of the things that we're trying to do at Alloy is really help companies advance their own digital transformations with really great digital experiences, as well as helping them apply the behavioral concepts to catch up to a lot of the big tech players in the industry. And you're also seeing a lot of disruptors that are popping up that are making a big difference as well because of this need for new digital experiences. One of the interesting and I think funny memes that I found online about digital transformation was a little question, and it was on a lot of the social media platforms, which is who led digital transformation in your company? And there were a few answers that were given. One was the CEO, one was the CTO, and I actually added the CMO because I've personally seen digital transformation start from the marketing side of organizations a lot. But the answer that was actually circled was COVID-19. And that is because it's been an incredibly powerful force in forcing all the companies out there to really push themselves along that digital transformation continuum. The reason why companies haven't already gone down the continuum is that digital transformation is really hard. And the reason why it's hard is it requires so many different skill sets and places within our organizations and companies to be able to make it happen. One is you've got to have really strong leadership who supports digital change and technology adoption in the organization. Without it, you'll never get off ground zero because people are going to be naturally resistant to change. And there's a lot of behavioral economic concepts that even go into digital transformation that we could probably spend a whole nother hour talking about that really affect people's responsiveness to change in your organization environment. The big part of that clearly is the people, operations, and culture as well. Without the right culture for people looking to adopt the change, then we're going to be much less likely to try to do so, and they're going to be very resistant. And clearly a big piece of this is to make sure that we have the data and the analytics so that we can measure success and understand what those interactions look like in our digital experiences. So as consumers and customers and people and users are utilizing the application, how do we measure against success? And if we don't have data and analytics as part of our core competency as an organization, we can't really measure enough to be adaptive. Another big part of it is that, and this is one I think people forget a lot of times, is compliance and legal have to be brought in from the very beginning. And the reason why is you're going to be doing a lot of new things in the organization. You're going to be interacting with customers in new ways. You're going to be looking for ways to make their experience easier to do business with you. And compliance can be a big part of getting stuff done, as people who deal with them in companies already probably know that. So it's a really big, important part, and one of the reasons why digital transformation is hard. Another piece is that clearly the technical integrations. In order to have a really holistic customer experience and to be able to support things like omni-channel, we have to have all of our experience and all of our consumer touch points integrated together with things like some concept of a CRM, even if it isn't necessarily a CRM. That's just an example of a way that we've got to be able to record certain pieces of information to be responsive to our customer needs from a digital perspective. And then lastly is, do you have the capability to build the tools that you need to build to support digital transformation? And evaluation and analysis against your strategy is a really important part to make sure that those things are accomplished in your organization. So you may have to look to hire, may partner with some people, or buy another company that can support some of these technical capabilities. All of these things should help feed in and get everyone in the entire organization focused on that critical part, which is the actual customer experience. And this is where behavioral economics really comes in, is how do we influence people and make people be responsive to these new digital experiences, and how do we encourage the desired behaviors that we're looking for? Every company, again, is on some part of this continuum. You were starting at the status quo, where they haven't really done a whole lot. And the middle area is more where they're agile and they've introduced some sort of agility into their organization. And basically that just means that they have to be able to be very responsive to customer demands and customer needs in a way that they can launch things very quickly, that they can actually support any kind of digital improvements or activity. You can measure against it, you kind of know what's going to happen. That's when companies become agile. And then what companies are able to do from there is actually start to be able to innovate. If you have that baseline foundation of agility, then you have the opportunity to innovate. You have the opportunity to try a lot of behavioral economics techniques as part of your holistic customer experience.
Like Matt said, these are not new tech trends, but they were drastically accelerated by COVID. Artificial intelligence, those fun chatbots that are on websites, they're there to help people with questions on the website and gather data for site optimization. Cloud and security, online education, telehealth, and work from home options have just become absolutely necessary in today's new normal environment. Of course, fintech, e-commerce, and streaming services have been up and coming for years now, but they've seen a huge increase and they've had to really pivot and ramp up those efforts, specifically, e-commerce, with everybody ordering from the previously mentioned Amazon. They had to start to better regulate what they were shipping first and making sure that the goods that they were sending were actually commodities versus, my neighbor that ordered a soccer ball for her kid and didn't get it until 3 weeks later. But I'm sure you've all Googled and burned through things on Netflix. Raise your hand if you've actually Googled what to watch. I know that that's a hot topic of conversation amongst friends, and have definitely done it myself. I did see recently that Netflix had added a new category to their homepage, and it was the top 10 watched in the US. So it's a nice little easy way to find out what was actually popular and what I should try next. We are going to, you've seen this theme. You've seen that we've talked about these 3 pillars that combine behavioral economics and tech. All of these are human-centered concepts. We're talking restaurants, grocery delivery, meetings. Wouldn't it be nice to sit across the table from somebody? Luckily, Zoom has enabled us to see people remotely. And of course, healthcare. These companies have been agile and they've had the ability to adapt to changes given our new environment. And they're also just trying to make their consumer lives more simple. I mentioned before in my quick intro that I love consumer brands that use advanced tech to make my life easier. Who doesn't love that? life should be simpler. So digging into some more specific examples, Lemonade. Not only do they have fun, cute branding, but they are trying to make insurance sexy and fun. I was going to say bring back insurance being sexy and fun, but let's be clear, it never really was. But most importantly, they are trying to make it simple. They began their company by being very transparent about the insurance industry as a whole and have really worked to remove those negative preconceived notions by making charitable donations a focal point of their business. You may remember brands like Tom's have also done this, although people do love shoes. Insurance is a little bit different. So they have a highly anticipated IPO looming, and Lemonade promises instant everything. And they've really made their mark with investors and partners because of their ability to upsell from those, simple introductory products, think renter's insurance, quick car insurance, to more lucrative products. So their value prop is that they can reel in consumers with this instant everything, fun, sexy insurance, but then really add value to their lives, and it's where they're bringing in a little bit more money. Couple that with powerful AI chatbots, affectionately referred to as Maya and Jim, and they've created what is now the #1 rated insurance company in the nation. So pretty impressive. Shipt is an example of digital transformation that is close to my heart. Not only have they saved me from grocery shopping with the previously mentioned rowdy children, but I actually worked at Shipt for nearly 3 years and managed the retail and CPG partnerships team. So of course, grocery shopping is something that is deeply personal, yet time consuming. So what Shipt is offering is giving back that time while providing a convenient solution. And COVID actually led to explosive growth for Shipt and grocery delivery as a whole. Pre-COVID, consumers spent about 3 to 5% of their grocery budgets online. So previously they were, if they spent $100 a month, they only spent $3 to $5 in delivery. They are now spending 15 to 18% of that budget through online grocery. It was a great option while we were in the shelter in place. It was great that your Shipt shopper would go out and run to the store for you. And what Shipt really works to do is make these orders as simple as possible by reducing friction. So Shipt has a buy again category that is actually the most popular category in the Shipt app. And again, it just provides an easy solution for a repeatable ordering process. On average, people order about 70% of the same products on each trip to the grocery store. So you've got your staples. This is actually my buy again category. You see, my children eat a lot of bananas. We go through a lot of bread. Red onions are actually a favorite in our household, and you got to have that cinnamon toast waffles. So this is just, again, making the shopping process as simple as possible, because buying groceries online was very foreign for a long time. What we learned after some user research and testing was the graphic that you'll see on the right is actually when you're in your cart on the Shipt app, towards the bottom, you would see things that you might have missed that Shipt knows have comparable products in your cart. So you might have tortilla chips in your cart. Well, you may be served salsa in this specific category because maybe you missed the salsa while you were shopping for your groceries. But we learned that people needed those prompts, and this is sort of comparable to the impulse buys in the checkout lane if you were actually physically in the grocery store, except they're just a little bit better informed through the data. So we were able to use the agile nature of the business as a whole to deploy things like this. These were great examples to demonstrate how big tech companies have utilized behavioral economics. But I would like to go through some examples of how Alloy has helped our partners to utilize behavioral economics in more everyday ways. Sweet Home, Alabama. Alloy has a long-standing relationship of traditional advertising and tech development with Alabama Travel. the goal of which is to bring tourists to the state of Alabama, which of course creates revenue. Here we use the principle of reciprocity. We noticed when visitors to our site opted to download the vacation guide that they were more likely to actually travel to the state. So we tested a prompt, which we talked about earlier, to increase the conversions of this download, or what we saw as desirable behavior, because it would then lead to hopefully more travel to the state. So this simple popover or prompt was easy to execute technically, and really required the bare minimum of details from a user. So we're only asking for first name, last name, email, company name was optional. But it just was that simple prompt to get them to actually download this guide. And this popover came up about 30 seconds after they'd been on the site, but were inactive. So, they'd seen some things on the site and had a good idea of what was going on. Why not download the guide? And to date, more than 35,000 travel guides have actually been downloaded. Another behavioral economic principle was used with our partner Spectrum Capital. They are currently building a luxury condo complex in Tuscaloosa. And in order to secure funding, they needed to get some units pre-sold. So Alloy was able to utilize some existing assets to develop a 3D interface, which you see here in the bottom left, so that attendees of an event could really imagine themselves in this new luxury condo. We all want to see where we're going to live and spend time, so we needed to display that without actually having built the complex. The principle of imperfect information is when one compares between current and future self, but has concerns over that unhappy future self. So this 3D interface allowed people to clearly visualize themselves in this beautiful space through the use of renderings and floor plans and the common areas of the overall development, thus eliminating objections or potential fears of that future self. And luckily, 75% of the inventory was actually pre-sold, which allowed the developers to secure the necessary funding to move forward with development.
So obviously Alloy has done a lot of digital work, and we try to leverage behavioral economics where it makes sense to do so. And then this webinar is about how you can take advantage of that and bring that back to your organization or company. So we want to make sure that we left you with something to be able to start the process of looking at behavioral economics and bringing that into your own digital experiences. But with that said, I wanted to make sure to really go back just for a moment, kind of focus on that agility and adaptability. I guess a baseline to be able to measure and be able to be responsive to things like behavioral economics. So the concept is that without the capability to try out some of these triggers and these prompts and be able to be responsive prompts, you got to have a very efficient planning and development process. You got to be able to not only push things out very quickly, you got to be able to measure them very quickly and be responsive. Sometimes it may go, your results may go down, and you want to be able to take these things down very quickly and then maybe pull back what you had before, or come out with a new feature that further takes advantage of the concept and optimize from there. And it requires that evaluation and analyzation. But one of the things that we commonly promote is to build a prototype. If you can build a prototype, it's cheaper to build. It's something that you can actually test out in a real world environment, and actually allows you to have that level of responsive to know before you ever push something in production that it already works. You've proven it, you tested it, you know that it works, you can actually bring it into your environment. So you don't have to sacrifice your business as you're being innovative and developing things. But that agility and adaptability is one of the key components and a necessary baseline to be able to support behavioral economics. So specifically focusing on behavioral economics itself, a big question is, where do we get started at? And one of the things that BJ Fogg says is that motivation is hard to change. It is possible to change motivation, and there are a lot of tactics and ways that we can utilize motivation change to get people to kind of head over to that far right side of the graph and actually respond to the prompt that we put in front of them. However, the ability is the place to start first. And that's because it's easier for us to then make actions easier for those end users and those customers as well. And it's because, again, our brains prefer simplicity in the environment. We're much more likely to engage in something that's just easy to use. So because motivation is going to be harder to change, if you're going to start somewhere, really actually focus on the ability area first. What can we do to make these actions and these prompts easier to do? And the way to really make sure that happens is to build an ability path, basically. So this is where you separate out a user journey. You look at all the different customer touch points. You look at the different places that you actually want to look to influence and change people's behavior as part of the experience, and encourage them to do so. And then as part of that, of course, there are some things you could do that would be harder to change people's ability. And that would be something like training and educating. Sometimes you go into an application, they have like a little tutorial to how to utilize the app. It's a little bit more difficult to implement. It's a little bit more investment heavy, and people typically don't like to engage in those type of experiences. So really the goal is to focus on simplicity of these interactions in these customer and end user touch points. And that is ultimately to try to increase the ease of the target behavior that you're looking for. But also don't forget that you got to make sure you prompt people as part of these touch points as well. You have to remind and push people to take action. And again, even if they have the right level of motivation combined with the right ability, without the prompt, they're not going to do anything. So you got to make sure you look at all the prompts and make sure they're aligned with where you want people to take action. And those also happen to be the touch points in which you're looking to make things easy for people and make things simplistic in order to change people's behavior. Just to talk about that a little bit more in terms of how you look at the simplicity, Fogg has already created a great model for us to utilize, and that is focusing on 6 simplicity factors. And so every one of these touch points that you look at, you want to look at this list of 6 things to see if you're doing the things that you need to do to make things simple. The first is time. If something requires more time than necessary, then it's not simple. And unless someone has a really high level of motivation, they're simply not going to spend the time to do it. Also, people value time differently. So somebody who's more wealthy actually value time more than money. So even though something may cost more, they would rather you just save them time anyway. So it's got to save time. It's got to be less time to be simple. Another one, the second one is money. If more money is required to achieve the activity or respond to the prompt as reasonably, then the action is just simply not easy. That's kind of more of an obvious one for people, but it's something to always look at as part of your experience. The third is physical effort. If something requires physical effort, people typically aren't going to do it. And they will at least have a tendency not to want to do it. They're only going to do it if, again, their motivation is really high. And so as an example, earlier in the Chantix, the way that they solved for that was not forcing people to actually take the physical activity of going to their doctor, but we'll allow you to do it online instead. So physical effort should be a focus of your activities with that. The fourth one is brain cycles. And again, the more that you make people think, the less likely they are to take action. And so it's also known as like thought effort, because it actually is effortful to have to think. People want to move over to that system one type of thinking that Daniel Kahneman talks about, that is the more innate system. And remember that 98% of what people actually are doing when they make decisions is utilizing that innate way of thinking. So we want to people are constantly looking to offload cognitive effort. We want to make sure that each touch point in our experience supports that. The fifth one is what's called social deviance. And that is if the target behavior goes against social norms, it's simply not easy. And it's just like, in Lindsay's example in 2002, if people are not used to knowing that other people are okay with getting in a stranger's car, they're not likely to do that. But nowadays it's so commonplace, and we all know that other people are used to utilizing that. So it feels like it's something that's okay for us to do also. And there's ways that you can kind of bring this into your digital experience, like showing how other people may like to do this, or talking about other people and their desire to do this. It makes it seem as though other people are okay with it, therefore I'm okay with it as well. And the last one is called non-routine. And this is basically the result of people being creatures of habit. When a behavior is non-routine, it's just simply not easy. And an example that I like to use here is that I'm kind of a coffee snob. I love coffee. I drink it every day. Making good coffee is a critical part of my day. However, I've got people in my family, wife, kids, who like to get other things from Starbucks. I personally do not love Starbucks coffee. I think they're a phenomenal brand. They do really great work. They use behavioral economics in a lot of what they do, but I just don't really like the coffee that much. However, even though I know that they're not going to have the coffee that I like, and I can probably get a better coffee elsewhere, the routine in my family is to stop at Starbucks. And so if you're trying to push something that's non-routine, you have to figure out ways to make it so that it is seemingly more part of people's routine. And simply put, if you're asking people to do something out of their normal routine, they're less likely to do it. So it's really important to, as you look across your different consumer and customer touch points, or even your touch points, if it's employee application, so on and so forth, you have to look at it as a chain. So each one of the things that we talked about in terms of simplicity is a link in that chain. As we all know, chain only works if all of the links are still existing as part of the chain. So if only one of these things break down for an individual, they're less likely to accomplish or achieve the desired behavior. They won't respond to your prompt. And so as you look across your different touch points, pull out the list of these 6 principles and then focus on the areas that you need to improve to make this easier for you to do business with, and basically easier to respond to the prompt with. So we know that behavioral economics is a huge subject. It's impossible to tackle in an hour, particularly when you're talking about digital transformation and how those two things integrate, and you're bringing in these concepts of COVID. However, there are other things that can be done from a behavioral economic standpoint to really influence behavior. We talked about motivation earlier. Motivation is harder to achieve than the starting point, which is focusing on ease of use and simplicity. But there are some things that we can do to really focus on people's motivation that do have a big impact as part of the experience. So where do we go from here? Once we've got the simplicity stuff kind of knocked down, how do we start affecting people's motivations as part of the experience? It's probably going to be a topic for our next webinar, just simply because we don't have enough time to go through the stuff today, but it's really great information, and it's really going to be broken down as part of that next discussion with in our future webinars, would be to focus on influencing what's called sensational motivation. It's really sort of a physical form of motivation. This is really focusing on things you can do to increase people's pleasure and removing their pain. And this is where something that we're all familiar with of gamification and leveling up and badging, that's where this has a really big impact on people's motivation. The other major area in concern with motivation is called anticipatory motivation. And if you can influence that, which is people's emotional response and how they look at motivation emotionally, you're actually looking at their hopes and fears. And if you can create experiences that leverage techniques to affect either their hopes and fears, then you're really going to do a good job of taking advantage of that level of affecting people's motivation as well. And then we're also in a future webinar going to cover Robert Cialdini's 6 principles of persuasions. They're really simple and easy, and you can look them up yourself. But in terms of how to apply those to digital experience will be our focus, because there are a lot of things that we can do in terms of some of the tactics that we talked today, as among many other tactics to look to influence people and to try to get them to respond to those prompts that we're putting in front of them. So hopefully you'll attend us for future webinars so we can kind of dive into that stuff, and I can continue to geek out because this is something that we love to talk about. So the 3 takeaways from today that you really need to be focused on if you want to really focus on both digital transformation organization and behavioral economics. One is to keep it human-centered. Everything that we do at Alloy is focused on the end user. It is the center of our universe. Yes, we care about the business and the business goals and objectives. That's context. But the thing that we really dive into is how do people respond to the digital experiences that we put in place. Technology is only a means to a holistic customer experience. The second that both Lindsay and I talked about quite a bit today was the agility and adaptability, that you have to have this baseline of being able to be responsive to your customers and to be able to put things in place very quickly and to be able to continually optimize against what you're experiencing. And the data as part of these experiences is what you must be able to do to ensure that you can even take advantage of something like behavioral economics. And the last one that we talked about today, that's a major takeaway, is focusing on simplicity. If you're looking to start somewhere and leveraging behavioral economics first, then you really want to focus on how to make their actions easier. Regardless of people's level of motivation, you can always bring down the ease of use, and you're going to convert more of your target customers to their desired behavior. And of course, if you need to know, if you need any assistance in this, obviously Alloy is here to help you. However, we wanted to give you enough information to do some of these things on your own. Again, if you got any questions for us, I think we're going to probably take some questions here in a moment. But if you do have any additional questions, please do not hesitate to email me or Lindsay directly. We'll make sure to respond to your questions. And if we don't get to all the questions in today's webinar, we'll actually reach out to you to respond to your question. So we want to make sure that everyone's questions are understood and tackled by us, but please don't hesitate to reach out. All right, so let's kind of get into the questions we have.
Yeah, we've got about 10 minutes left, and we have Three good questions. So I'm going to fire them at you if you're good with that. Let's see. What Here's one. What ways do you recommend testing and proving prototypes? A/B testing, surveying the users after a conversion. How do you avoid confirmation bias during that process if you went in with a firm idea of influencing target behavior, but the results are suggesting otherwise?
Right, exactly. So just to start off, that's a really big question, a really good one. To kind of focus on that first part of the question is, what are some of the tactics that we can utilize, and where is it appropriate to use the right tactics in terms of testing out a prototype? The first thing that I would recommend is if it's a concept level idea, then a really good way to test that would be in a more qualitative type of environment, which would be more like a focus group. If it's something that is a bit of a bigger change, like you're launching a new experience, a new application, or you're completely revising an application that you actually want to build a prototype to then test out in more of a UX testing type of environment. There's lots of online tools to do that. You can utilize UX labs to do that as well. We do a lot of that here at Alloy to understand what people's real responsiveness are to that. And it can be at different levels. You can do a survey after to be able to say, what did you think about the experience, and ask certain types of questions. And then try to give people the opportunity to give you some of that qualitative and quantitative type of responsiveness, because it's a big change and you want to make sure you really truly understand that big change through. Now, if it's a small change, if it's like the shading of a button or some of the terminology on the page, and that some of those things you can really get away with just putting into a production environment, but you utilize some of the test and target, there's a lot of tools actually that do that. I mentioned test target, that happens to be one of the tools. There's a lot of other different ones that you can utilize to actually push those things out into your production environment. And some of the key to some of those tools is they don't always serve the new experience. What they do is they actually mix in those experiences in with the normal experience that already exists. And that kind of reduces your risk that you may have in launching any type of different version of your experience. You don't want to say lose a lot of traffic because you tried something new. So these tools will see how you're responding in real time, and if you're getting the desired behavior that you're looking for, and then the tool will actually start serving more of that environment until eventually that's all that it will actually serve. And so that's a really good way to test these things out. Confirmation bias is something that you do need to worry about in any type of testing environment or any type of focus group, and you just have to make sure you set the stage of that to not force the people into an experience where you let them know anything that may be happening ahead of time. And so one of the ways that we do that, if we're doing something like say a UX review of a prototype, and then the way that that's handled is through a moderator, and the moderator would actually say, just perform this task with no other information, and they just leave it wide open to letting the end user do that. And then there's mapping tools. You can actually record how the end user looks at that. You can look at their eyes to see where they're looking around the page. But ultimately, you want to make sure that you don't predispose them to any kind of thinking prior to those experiences. Clearly, if it's in a production environment, you're already setting the stage for that as part of your other experience. The other parts of your experience, you're already kind of aware of how you're trying to push people into a certain direction. But the point of all this is that you got to be able to have this environment where you can easily test these things out, depending if it's a concept, if it's a completely huge revision of a website, and then if it's an actual just a smaller change that you want to try out in your production environment. There are hybrid versions of this, and we do this quite a bit, where we will focus on one area of an application. Recently, we did a big web redesign project where a company was actually looking to digitally transform their entire web experience to try to respond to some disruptors in the environment. And one of the things that we did was say, okay, what are the most critical areas of the experience that we want to focus on that result in the most of the desired behaviors that have the biggest impact on our business? And then we prototyped out those individually and tested those out separately. And that's a way then you realize when you're dealing with a massive website, you're not really going to be able to prototype the entire thing out, or becomes more arduous and difficult and investment heavy. And so you can kind of focus on a hybrid model of testing out the areas where you think would have the biggest impact on your customer experience or your business. Hopefully I answered all of that. It was a really good and big question. Thank you for whoever submitted that.
Great. Okay, next one. This is a good one too. What if you work in a highly regulated environment? Is there a way to make digital coupons or other redeemable products audit ready?
Yes, absolutely. So when I had that one slide that was up and we talked about why digital transformation is hard and you had all the different components of the business, always put legal up there and compliance at one of the top, because in highly regulated industries, it is much more difficult and arduous to push things out, as whoever asked that question probably already knows. And so the actual process of working through compliance needs to start early. You have to bring them in with the strategy from the beginning and talk about how are we going to be able to push through things that need to change that consumer experience. In highly regulated industries, as you know, there's a lot of limitations. Some of them can be state by state, which make it even more complicated. And so ensuring that you've got a very efficient process for your compliance to take a look at your changes and being able to approve those before they actually get pushed out. The key to it is less about technology and more about your business process management of how you interact from your digital team to your marketing team and your compliance. Everybody has to have a seat at the table, and they need to be working in conjunction with each other to make sure as you look to produce something that's new, because that's the nature of digital transformation, is to do a lot of new stuff. You got to make sure that the compliance people are actively involved in making sure that, yes, we've got a process in place. We can get you something turned around within a week. It can't take 6 months to get back to me on this possible change, because that's always going to limit your ability to do anything in digital transformation, even if you have all the other pieces in place. Lindsay, did I seem to answer that question? You think
Yes,
so?
yeah, I would definitely agree, because I know that at Shipped at the onset we had a lot of compliance to work through, but it was always evolving and always changing. So having someone with an eye on that was really important, because it just needed to happen, like you said, Matt, quickly, and we all had to be a little bit more agile with it. Okay, last question. We've got 2 minutes left. Any thoughts on virtual reality or augmented reality? Has it increased during the crisis, or do you think it will be big in the future?
100% absolutely on both of them. It was already a trend in place. And it is something that is super critical for a lot of the things that we've already talked about. I think a really good example of it is Warren B. Parker. It's a sunglass and glasses company that we're all familiar with. And I've got even a personal example of that. My wife needed glasses really bad. She was on her last pair of contacts and got really freaked out. This has just happened in the last couple of weeks. Like, how do I get my glasses? And I really don't feel like waiting for the 3 sets of glasses coming that I choose from. I get to try them out and then got to send everything back off. Again, that's physical, it's time, effort, and probably even requires a little bit of money to be able to do that. And people just simply don't want to do that. And so they actually had a really good solution for supporting that using augmented reality. And that is the capability to allow you to see yourself with those glasses on in real time. And it's actually, pretty good. They did a good job. The app's a little bit buggy, to be transparent. We didn't build it. We'd love to build it. We even talked to Warren B. Parker about it, building it before, but alas, we didn't build it. But that is a really great example of how that can really impact the customer experience, because it makes it super easy for them. It takes away all those barriers of that future self. Do I really want to deal with getting clothing and then sending it back again? Even though that's somewhat convenient and more convenient than maybe for a lot of people to going to the store, the virtual reality and augmented reality can bridge the gap there, and then really make these experiences so that you can do things to give people a sense of what it's going to be like before they actually have to buy. And I think that what happened with us is she utilized the app, she made the purchase, didn't need all the glasses sent out, which I'm sure would be more expensive for them anyway. And she's wearing those glasses today. She literally got them in the mail yesterday. So,
Yeah, I think I've redesigned my house a few times with the different augmented reality options.
Yeah, that's another good one. Just getting the paint swatches and looking at the colors of your walls versus going to Home Depot and getting all the little things that show all the paints. Another great example. Like, nobody really wants to do that. Nobody wants to make the extra trip. But if you can just pull up your app and easily look, you know what? Now I'm going to buy my paint from Home Depot or Sherwin-Williams or whoever had the app. And that's one of the great opportunities for brands. If you're the one that's providing the experience, nobody wants to leave your experience and then go somewhere else, because again, time and money and other things that make it less likely they're going to do that. Keep them in your experience, give them the experiences they're looking for, and convert them as customers. All right, so it looks like, I'm sorry for anyone that submitted questions that we didn't get a chance to get to. We'll make sure to get back to you on your questions. I obviously love talking about this stuff. I also love talking about myself. So this is a real big fun it's a lot of fun for me and a great experience. Again, our future webinars, we're going to continue to focus on behavioral economics and digital experiences. On the next set of webinars, I'm thinking that we're really going to focus on motivation. We may do a little bit of recap on some of the simplicity stuff that we talked about today, but we're going to make sure that we target how to change people's motivations as part of the experience. And that's going to be something that could have a huge impact on your business. So I hope you see our emails, and I hope we prompt you with our emails so that you look to join the webinar. And thank you for everyone who attended today. I had a lot of fun with this. You'll have a great day, and we appreciate your attendance.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.